14, the last great nomadic changes from Genghis Khan to Timur. Alright, I've included a map of the Mongol Empire during this time period, and it does divide it up into the areas of Genghis Khan's sons and grandsons. Alright, the Mongol Empire of Genghis Khan, Mongol culture. You're going to have nomadic pastoralists, and this is going to be our last great adventures of our nomads. So they were roaming their areas and continuing to go from pasture to pasture. Especially goats and sheep. Eventually they will get some horses from some of the areas as well, and they will have their ponies that they ride. They were divided up by tribes and then divided into clans, and you would have a lot of the clans gather together as a full tribe for temporary confederation, sometimes lasting a year or two depending on battles and conflicts with other nomads, but then they would disperse back into their clan settling areas. Leaders were elected. And a lot of that was based off of strength and stature and leadership among keeping diplomacy as well as your fighting warrior style technique as well. Again, another map dividing up the area at that time under Genghis Khan. Alright, the Mongol Empire, the making of a great warrior, the early career of Genghis Khan, Kublai Khan. Kublai Khan was his grandfather in the 1100s, and he's going to defeat the Qin forces. This is a different force than the Qin. Okay, Genghis Khan is going to develop alliances among the Mongols. He was actually, when his father was killed, he was actually captured and would eventually escape captivity, will end up joining a strong chiefdom, and that is where he's going to learn and refine his skills, and he will actually, when he comes to power, take revenge on those that had hurt his family and had hurt him. In 1206, he is elected the Kongan, which was the supreme ruler. Here is the area of the campaigns of Genghis Khan and his conquerings. Alright, the Mongol Empire of Genghis Khan, building the Mongol war machine. They were mounted warriors, so again, mostly cavalry. The Tumans were 10,000 troops. So if you can imagine 10,000 cavalry, that's larger than any cavalry army up until that time period. They even had a messenger force where they would have multiple horses and riders along their routes in their empire, and they could even ride up to 90 miles a day. So they were able to cover a lot of terrain very quickly. They learned how to eat and sleep in the saddle. They would even carry multiple horses with them so they could switch off as were needed. They adopted gunpowder and cannons. They were also known for their short bow, and they could shoot up to a range of 400 yards, which was pretty impressive to the long bow of the Western Europeans that could only shoot up to about 100 yards. Conquest, the Mongol Empire under Genghis Khan in 1207 will start its expeditions into China and defeat the Zhai, which was the Tengat king, and they will conquer that area, and they will end up continuing to conquer other areas and eventually will come back to China. The first assault on the Islamic world will be the Kara Kiate were defeated, and they will set up the Mongolian era in the Middle East. We've also learned in 1258 that Baghdad falls, and they're going to be conquering the Seljuk Turks as well. Khamorazam was Muhammad Shah II, and he was defeated. He was the one who had opposition towards the Mongols, and he will pay for it by getting defeated. Genghis Khan will return to the area of China and defeat the Qin Empire that had been reestablished in that area. In 1227, he had been wounded. Some say he was poisoned. Some say he just fell ill to the wound. But on his way back into that area, he will end up dying. And so his empire from Persia to the North China Sea was one of the largest during that time period. And then it will get divided back up. And he lectured, before his death, he lectured his grandson and his sons that were remaining on not fighting against each other and staying united. The life under the Mongol Imperium, it's going to be harsh but yet tolerant. Harsh with military rule to instill fear into the people, but yet tolerant at the same time because they were tolerant of religions. They loved to keep the artisan class and the specialist classes and even some of the upper echelon with your elites just for the education of it because a lot of them liked to learn about the areas that they were conquering. Genghis Khan had moved the capital to Karakorum. Shamastistics was their religion, however they did tolerate other religions. And they did form new administrations in the areas that they would go and conquer. Specifically in China where the Mongols were at the top and then Islamic nomads were kind of your second in charge and they continued the social order that way. Commerce is going to thrive. A lot of the trade routes actually became safe. With the Mongols in charge, nobody wanted to steal from other areas, and so therefore the Mongols were kind of policing it and they kept it protected. The death of Genghis Khan and the division of the empire, as mentioned earlier, he dies in 1227. His 3 sons and 1 grandson will take over. Ogedai, the 3rd son, was elected the Great Khan. And this will be the area that is established for them. They will actually reach all the way over to the borders of Germany. All right, the Mongol drive to the west, the Golden Horde. They are going to continue with their way of living in their Khan tents and villages that they set up. Some of them will eventually move into the palaces and mosques that they conquer that they don't destroy. Russia is taken over in the early 1200s. They're going to take many of those kingdoms. We've previously mentioned the Tartars, which means people from hell. And they are going to invade and gain power during this time period. Batu was the grandson of Genghis Khan, and in 1236 he begins the conquest of Russia. By 1240, Kievan was taken and sacked, but Novgorod was spared. However, Moscow is going to be the one that thrives with commerce and trade just because of its trade routes. And that will lead to a large metropolitan area. It will lead to the Orthodox Church. And it's also going to lead to the downfall of the Mongols in that area as Moscow becomes its strongest point. And eventually, through the Mongols becoming complacent where they're living, also dealing with some deaths of Ogedai and some of the other Khans that they were bringing back to burials, Russia was able to take its victory back in 1380. Mongol incursion and the retreat from Europe. Again, the death of Ogedai was one of the reasons they're retreating from some of these areas, and Hungary became a dominant force that competed with them. And then when a lot of the forces left, so Western Europe actually gets spared more or less because they become content with what they had. The Mongol assault on the Islamic heartlands. Hulagu is the grandson of Genghis Khan, and he's going to attack form the Ilakan Empire in the southwest region. And it is west to Mesopotamia, parts of North Africa. They sacked Baghdad, and however, they will end up being stopped by some of their own people that they enslaved. The Mamelukes will be established in Egypt. They were sold into slavery in Egypt, and they will be the ones that eventually rival them and were able to stop them. It was a unique opportunity because they were Islam, and the Christian crusaders that had been in the region actually let the Islamic people pass through freely, unharmed, to attack the Mongols because they were afraid if they did get defeated, then Western Europe would be next. And so it was a unique time where some treaties were made, and Islam and Christianity kind of aided each other a little bit when before they had been fighting against each other. Ogedai renews the attack on China, and this will be under Kublai Khan. Grandson of Genghis Khan attacks the Song era, and the southern Song are going to prove to be a little bit difficult. They're going to hang around and eventually revolt and cause some of the problems for the Mongols. In 1271, they're going to transform to the Yuan dynasty, and the capital will be moved to Tatu, which was present-day Beijing. The gender roles in the convergence of the Mongol and Chinese culture. Mongol women are going to retain their liberties. Towards the end, they'll start to lose some of them, but for the most part, they were involved in war parties, hunting parties. Chabi, which was the wife of Kublai, was very influential in her education. She was an advisor to her husband, and they were a good match for each other politically and even diplomatically with relations to other areas. The Mongol tolerance and foreign cultural influence, the Mongol patronage, attacks on scholars and artists. Basically, the Mongols liked having the artists and the artisans and the entertainers around. They sought joy in that. However, the native Chinese, your scholar gentry, opposed that, and they didn't like it. Religious toleration, Buddhists, Nestorians, which are the Nestorian Christians in the Middle East area, Latin Christians, Taoist, Muslims, all of them were tolerated and were allowed to practice their beliefs so long as they weren't going to rise up against them. Marco Polo visits this area during this time period, tells about the lavish living that they had and the riches, but also their fierce rule as well. Social policies and scholar gentry resistance. Ethnic Chinese are going to resist. They were lower on the social order, and so they weren't appreciative of that, and the examination system was never allowed to be put in order because the Mongols were afraid that would give the scholar gentry too much power, and they wanted to keep them lower. Kublai is going to protect the peasant land, so that helps out for a long time. Establishes famine relief. He reestablishes the granaries that had been neglected for years. He reduces the tax and the labor burdens on the lesson, and so this helps a lot of stability for a while. The fall of the House of Yuan, the death of Kublai Khan. His successors were not very strong, and the scholar gentry see the opportunity to attack the weaknesses. Also, they are going to attack Japan, and they are going to fail. One of the reasons, even though they end up getting a strong navy, just trying to bring that many people over and cross the strong winds and the storms occurring, you don't have as many soldiers, and they're more worn out, and they end up losing their battles. By the 1350s, they start to lose their territories, and Zhu Yangzhang founds the Ming dynasty. And the important thing to know is he's a peasant. Unlike some of the warriors or aristocrats that came to power, he's a peasant who rises up. The aftershock, the brief ride of Timur. Timur the Lame, was a Turkish-based area. It was in Samarkand, which was the one Khanate that was not covered in the book. And he was fierce, probably even more fierce than the Mongols, the other Mongols themselves. He was a Turkish nomad. He will attack Persia, the Fertile Crescent, India, and Russia. He kills several 100,000 in Delhi in North India to prove his point. He would build mounds of skulls to show his strength. And when he died in 1405, so does the empire. He doesn't affect trade in any manner. He doesn't affect politics. He really doesn't do anything but just destroy. And so he was the last of the nomads, and we're going to start moving in to a transition stage with chapter 15 and into an expansion area of Europe. And this is the Mongol growth that they have. Just one more time, in case you're watching this. Alright, I've included another map of the Mongols. Alright, and then there's a few reads. I do want to point out, the Mongols were big on a passport. So the passport actually existed back during the time of the Mongols, and you had to have this passport, especially in China, in the Yuan dynasty, to go from place to place, and if you didn't have it, you could be put to death. It was just a way of tracking where people were going. There's also some artwork in here, and some pictures of who the people were. And that concludes chapter 14.